Ash trees form a common part of the British landscape. Bushy and beautiful in full leaf, they also provide strong hardwood when coppiced. And interestingly, while thorn trees provide the most common tree-related place name in England, ash trees actually come second. People on the Isle of Man even believe that ash trees maintain their sacred springs, keeping them pure. People considered ash an important tree. It was dangerous to even cut off a branch without respect. One young man in Derbyshire cut one down and was even evicted from the parish. So we can see quite a lot of links between the ash tree and folklore, and that is exactly what we are going to explore in this week's episode of Fabulous Folklore. Hello there and welcome to Fabulous Folklore, the podcast for all things folklore, occult and just a bit weird. I'm your host Icy Sedgwick, blogger, fantasy author and your guide into these rather mysterious realms. I've got some rare things to show you, so come on in, take a look around, but be careful not to touch anything. These things sometimes bite. Well, hello there and welcome back to Fabulous Folklore with me, your host Icy Sedgwick. I will apologise in advance that my voice is doing some very peculiar things today, and I'm hoping that it will hold out long enough for me to actually record this episode. Now, interestingly, it's actually the 7th of September as I'm recording this episode, purely because my laptop needs to get sent away to fix the fact the hinge basically broke on the lid, so I'm doing as many things as possible in advance as I can. So yeah, that is why I'm doing this so early. But anyway, let's crack on with this week's episode because I feel like you want to get into the folklore because that is, after all, why we are here. So we are continuing with our folklore of deciduous trees month. So far we've done oak and willow, and then next week we're going to wrap things up with the hazel tree. So like I said in the intro, the links between ash trees and folklore really do stretch back quite a long way, and for example we can find links in ancient Ireland because 3 of Ireland's 5 guardian trees were the ash tree, and it's also the second most common tree found beside holy wells in Ireland. The most common, if you're wondering, is hawthorn. Many people do actually believe that the ash had importance in well-dressing activities, and the link between the ash and water isn't actually that surprising because the tree was also sacred to Poseidon, Greek god of the sea. And if you are interested in the ash tree in Ireland, or indeed any of Ireland's trees, I can highly recommend Ireland's Trees, Myths, Legends and Folklore by Niall McAteer. So he looks at the myths from an Irish perspective, and it's a really interesting book. But let's quickly head to the Nordic world and find out a little bit more about ash trees in their mythology. Now, Paul Kendall describes Yggdrasil as an ash tree, and obviously you would know Yggdrasil as the world tree, which links the underworld, our realm and the heavens, and basically this means that the ash essentially holds the cosmos together. Now, in a lot of ways the ash makes a good choice for Yggdrasil since the trees can apparently grow to around 35 metres in height. Interestingly, Margaret Baker points out that the tree's roots are believed to cover the same depth below ground as the branches reach into the air. Other trees do vie for the position of Yggdrasil, so we have seen the oak and the yew are both put forward as potential contenders, but in a lot of ways I think the ash actually makes a little bit more sense. Yggdrasil in and of itself is also important to Norse cosmology because Odin hung on the tree for 9 days and dreamed of the Futhark runes, although I should point out that some people do make their rune staves from rowan rather than ash, so there's a lot of discussion about which tree is likely to be Yggdrasil. However, the Nordic connections with ash trees do continue because Thor and Odin both apparently had magical spears made of ash, and mortal Vikings also used ash for their spears, while people referred to them as the Aesling or Men of Ash. Some people believe that Tolkien took inspiration from these ancient magical practitioners because even Gandalf's staff is apparently made of ash. And that would explain a lot of the connections between ash and magic in general, because it's believed that many witches made their brooms from ash staffs. And indeed, Druidry.org actually theorised that witches did use ash because of its Yggdrasil connections, but it could of course be a lot more simple than that, because ash makes great poles when you coppice it, and it's a very strong wood. It's handy for tools and handles because the wood takes shocks without splintering, and indeed many articles do talk about the fact that ash used to be a really popular wood for things like garden handles, for like hoes and spades and things, because of the fact it's got a really good natural shock absorber property to it. Now, the links between witches and ash trees don't stop at the broomstick, because some people actually believe that witches even lived inside ash trees. And remember from the elder tree episode, people also believed that they lived inside elder trees. Now, in some of the Germanic traditions, the Askafroa lived in the ash tree, and this was an evil spirit that could wreak havoc, so people actually made a donation to her on Ash Wednesday to keep her happy. Naturally, with all this enchantment knocking around, people made milk pails and churn staffs from ash to prevent the butter from being bewitched. And in Hampshire, in some places, the wassailing cup may be made from ash. Ash also has wider protective qualities because you could sew a sprig of ash and a little piece of elm bark into your coat lining for protection. And in Yorkshire, people would tie bunches of ash leaves to horse bridles to protect them both against flies and evil magic. And obviously remember that because ash is such a dense wood, it was also one of the traditional woods used for the Yule log, and meanwhile a wand made of ash actually symbolised reverence. And also ash trees could bestow interesting powers as well, and there was a belief in the West Country that people buried the first nail clippings of their children under ash trees because this would make them great singers, which is quite an interesting connection. Now, I'm going to move on from those slightly more grab bag collection of superstitions to the link between ash and prophecy, because there was a belief that you could put ash leaves under your pillow and then see what your dreams bring you. In Northern England, the practice was particularly helpful if you were a young woman and you wanted to dream of your future husband. Young women were also advised of another use of the ash in love divination, and if they found an even ash, they should put it into their glove, saying, "The even ash in my glove, the first I meet shall be my love." Now, the even ash is essentially an ash leaf that's got an even number of smaller leaves along each side of the stalk. And you could also use these for luck. So if you found one, you should pick it up and say, "Even ash I do thee pluck, hoping thus to meet good luck. If no luck I get from thee, I shall wish thee on the tree." There is also the old proverb, "Avoid an ash, it counts the flash," which refers to the belief that ash attracts lightning strikes. I have also heard people rework this as "Avoid an ash, it courts the flash," which would actually, I think, make more sense, but that particular version, "Avoid an ash, it counts the flash," came from John Simpson and Jennifer Speaks' The Oxford Dictionary of Proverbs. Also, according to Margaret Baker, a failed crop of keys or ash seeds predicts a death in the royal family, and allegedly no ash trees bore keys in 1648, which was the year before Charles I's execution. So make of that what you will. Now, we have obviously looked at the link between ash trees and magic and indeed prophecy, but now we're going to have a look at the link between ash trees and healing, which I think in a lot of ways this section's the part where I really came across ash trees for the first time. And a teaspoon of ash sap became a popular remedy suitable for newborn babies, and indeed in some places it became the recommended first meal of newborn babies. I wouldn't recommend it, but there we go. In some villages, if you had a weak or ailing child, you would make a cleft in an ash tree or sapling, and then the child would be passed through the cleft. In some places, they were passed through like 11 times, but the number does vary across the different sources that I've read. But then what they would do is they would then bind the tree back together. Sometimes they would nail it together. And this binding the tree would then help the tree to heal as the child healed. And in some places, the child would also grow quite protective of their tree. And it's not surprising because quite a lot of people believed that the lives of the tree and the child actually became linked through this ritual. And apparently some woodsmen even found the nails in the ash trees many years later. So it is quite cool that it's evidence that the ash tree did obviously survive this particular procedure. And in Northern England, people thought that ash trees could cure rickets. And elsewhere in Britain, people also believed that it could cure warts. Now, you can give this one a try if you want, but you were believed to carry a pin in or put a needle in your clothes somewhere. And then after 3 days of carrying it around, you would push it into the wart, pull it out, and then push it into the ash bark. And then as you did so, you would say, ashen tree, pray by these warts of me." If you are going to do this, apparently it should transfer the wart to the tree, but if you've got multiple warts, you should have a different needle or pin for each wart. And then apparently you should then start seeing warty growths on the tree, which is your wart having been transferred. In Herefordshire, people pinned a lock of hair to an ash tree to cure whooping cough, and apparently this could even cure cases of whooping cough as far away as London, so that was a bit of a mail order idea as far as I can gather from Baker, that people would essentially send locks of their hair and people would then pin them onto this particular ash tree. There's also a rather strange remedy that people suffering from ague would describe their symptoms to a woodsman, and then once the patient left and went home, the woodsman would then cut the first branch from a maiden ash. And maiden ash trees are those that are self-sown, so they're not planted by humans, they're not cultivated by humans, they're not transplanted or anything. They're essentially trees that have just done their own thing. And the patient should feel immediate relief once the branch is being cut. And this is a super specific one, but I kind of love it anyway. If you found an ash chip that had been cut when the sun entered the sign of Taurus, and that's like the point when the sun actually enters the sign, the chip could actually cure nosebleeds. And apparently someone in Salisbury tried this for James II in 1688 and it actually worked. So that one's on record. It's entirely possible it might have been a coincidence, but it does make quite a good story. Why Taurus? I'm not 100% sure, but there we go. And finally, distillations of ash leaves could apparently help restore hearing. And with this remedy, you were directed to chop up the leaves, distill them in water, and then use the solution to rinse out your ears. Personally, I think you're probably better off seeing a pharmacist. And there are also some links between ash trees and animals, and also pain remedies for animals using the ash tree, which is quite cool that it doesn't just restrict itself to people. So one of the really quite random remedies for pain in cattle involves shrews, because people thought that cows ended up in pain because a shrew ran over them. Apparently, this is according to Jacqueline Simpson. So what they would do is they would bore a hole in an ash tree trunk, and then they would block a live shrew in the hole. And then if they laid the twigs or leaves from that particular ash tree, they could use those to cure any pain or cramp felt by the cattle. So it's one of these ideas of sympathetic magic that you think that the shrew causes the problem, so you can then transfer the problem into the tree, and thus that becomes the cure. Elsewhere, people buried horseshoes under felled ash trees. Farmers would then take twigs from these trees and then pass them over their cattle's back to cure them of ailments. I can't help thinking that that one sounds like a slightly better use of your time, but you know, who am I to judge? Now, the final one I think is fabulous, and I can't quite put my finger on why, I just think it's cool. And this is the fact that for some reason, snakes apparently hated ash trees. So people would hang wreaths from the ash tree nearest the farmhouse to protect everyone within from snake bites. And you could also draw a circle around an adder with an ash stick, and it would compel the snake to stay within the circle. I can't work out, and it didn't say if that was for a specific period of time or kind of forever. But I did think that was quite an interesting thing, that how many people actually tried that to see if it even worked. I mean, adders will generally leave you alone because they want to just be out doing their addery things. But as I say, there's quite a lot of animosity between snakes and ash trees in folklore. It should, of course, go without saying that these remedies are for entertainment purposes. So if you are having health problems, please go and see a doctor and seek actual medical assistance. Now, I can't talk about ash trees and not mention Clara dieback, also known as ash dieback. And Britain saw its first confirmed cases in 2012. And essentially, ash dieback is caused by a fungus, and trees stand little chance once it takes hold. Now, it originated in Asia, and the types of ash trees that have evolved there have also evolved a resistance to the fungus, whereas the native European trees didn't have the dieback fungus to evolve alongside, so they have no resistance to this fungus. And it's estimated that 80% of UK ash trees will die from ash dieback. This is going to have a massive impact on biodiversity and indeed the species that depend on ash trees. Now, according to the Woodland Trust, there is some indication that some trees do appear to be resistant to the fungus, and scientists are essentially examining their genetics to see if they can help, because if they could breed a new generation of resistant trees, that would stem the tide, although that would also take at least 50 years to have an effect. Now, if you do see a tree that may be affected, you can actually report it, because there's all kinds of things that the Forestry Commission can then do with trees that are infected to try and stop them passing it to other trees. And there is a link in the show notes to the article about ash dieback in case that's something that you want to look out for. Now, ash trees are a wonderful addition to the British countryside, and their folkloric links really do make them a magical part of our landscape. And I think what I really like about ash trees is the fact that we do find them in so many other places as well. I mean, as I say, look at the link between Poseidon and the ash tree as well. So they're a really wonderful tree within European folklore as well. So hopefully we'll be able to find some kind of way to not lose all of them, because that really would be such a massive problem. And apparently it would even cost billions of pounds to put right as well. So hopefully there will be some kind of solution discovered at some point. And I'm sorry to end on that downer, but I just felt like I had to mention it because it is something that is proving to be quite a problem for ash trees. And they are so wonderful. Now, I hope you enjoyed that episode, and my voice is almost completely held out until the end of it. So next week, don't forget, we have got the hazel tree, and then after that, we're going to go into all things spooky for October. If you are a Patreon supporter, we are going to be having a look at psychopomps for the supporter exclusive episode in September, so look out for that. And then in October, the exclusive episode will be about the ghosts of Glamis Castle in Scotland, and the illustrator talk is going to be about the way that Halloween appears in movies. So if you would like to take part in any of that fabulous content that's extra, then you can check out the link below to find out how to become a member of the Fabulous Folklore family on Patreon, and it would be marvellous to see you there. Other than that, I hope you have a marvellous week ahead, whatever it is that you end up doing. I hope that September is treating you kindly. So I hope to see you next week for our magical, marvellous tour of the hazel tree, and I'll see you then. Cheerio. Well, thank you for listening, and thanks for visiting Fabulous Folklore. I hope you enjoyed your stay. If you did, why not consider subscribing in your podcast app of choice? If you enjoy the show, why not leave me a review and help other listeners to find it as well? And if you'd like bonus exclusive episodes of the podcast, then why not support me on Patreon? It does help me to keep the show going, and it means that you get a little bit extra every month as well. And you can find all of the necessary links in the show notes below. So without any further ado, I will bid you adieu, and I hope that you have safe travels wherever you're going on to next.